Hello and welcome to Hugelbed Diary on the 28th of July 2016, and I said I would update you on how our Hugelbed is doing now that it's installed. It's astounding. Let's start with a tiny little bit of what comes out of it. Here. And we follow that up, this beautiful pumpkin plant. It shows a bit of yellow there, probably indicating it needs a bit of food. And all the way up to, hard to recognize, the Hugelbed. I said it would be ideally covered in green the next update, which is this one. But never did I expect something like this. This is insane. So much food, herbs, flowers for insects. Incredible. And I have tried to grow pumpkins before in Scotland and got about 4 leaves and 1 flower with a tiny fruit underneath, which then pretty soon started rotting. This is a monster. I've never seen anything like this apart from during one trip to Australia. And this is in Sweden. If you can make out what looks like the pumpkin leaves, this is all one plant. Spreading all over the bed all the way to the other side as well. There's 1 or 2 others. The yellow must do something about it. I gave it 1 feed with manure tea, a mix of manure tea and stinging nettle tea, but I think I need a bit more. Here is 1 tiny pumpkin, and there are quite a few. Tomatoes. Late July and the flowers are only just sort of appearing, so I'm not entirely sure if they will come to ripe fruits this year, but just the size and the health of the plants astounds me. We've got a few in the greenhouse as well, which I'll show you later, and they're a fraction of the size and they look nothing as healthy. They have a few fruits already, still green, but these plants are just huge and they look so healthy. And apart from just a bit of sprinkle of that liquid manure, I didn't feed them at all after getting the bed ready. There is so much nutrition in the bed. Here we have a few zucchinis. Had a few fruits already and they were sort of small because we were quite anxious to try them, and they were delicious. A few forming, lots of flowers. I think the main harvest will come in a week or 2 and it'll be quite overwhelming. There's more zucchini plants all over. That'll be good. We've been eating salad for weeks now and you don't even notice, you don't see the salad going down. In fact, it's increasing all the time. Salad leaves are sort of the cover plant, the cover crop, and they're just doing really well. We had some initial, we thought, problems with snails, and at night we started picking them off and throwing them to the chickens and the ducks, which weren't at all interested. They need to learn a little bit. And after a few days they just disappeared, and now we, if at all, we find maybe 1 or 2 a night on this whole bed, whereas before we picked off a few dozen at least. So these salad leaves are pretty safe. Now here's the first part of the Hugelbed, I mean the part which was finished first. This is not doing so well, not that much growing here, still a few nice things. Happy gooseberry bush, picked the berries just a few moments ago. Yeah, the bush isn't too happy, so I'll have to do some feeding there, but it might be suffering from the fact that the bed is settling a bit and that its roots are maybe disturbed by that. It might make it, it might not, but it's a minor player in this. If we lose it, it won't be a great disaster. The fact that not so much seems to be growing here, I think might be due to the fact that when I got this part going, after adding the wood, the turf upside down on top of that, and then some loose soil on top of that, compost, and then a straw layer. The straw layer probably was too thick, and then I sprinkled the seed mix onto that and watered it in, and probably many of the small seeds either didn't make it high up in the loose and pretty dry straw. We had a pretty dry summer so far, or some of them washed down so far that they germinated but didn't make it to the surface. After this part with the very thick straw layer, I changed tactics, and then this came out, which looks a lot better. And the difference was, I again tried a few different things, but they both have seemed to, yeah, two things I suppose, both seem to have worked out quite well. The straw layer in any case is less thick, and I tried either to sprinkle the seed on first and water it in and then add a thin layer of straw, and thin means maybe 1 inch, whereas over there it was at least 3 or 4. So either the seed first and then the straw, or the other way around. Both seem to have worked quite well. Here's still a few of the seedlings, trees and bushes. Oh, I saw a lizard there. You probably didn't, but there was a lizard there. Lots of wildlife. Cornflower, lots and lots more lettuce, salad leaves, and the wheat that you see growing here is just a result of there still being wheat seeds in the straw. And I picked that out of the higher parts of the bed, but decided to leave a few around the edges. We may be able to sow some next year on the land and use that as chicken feed. Not too keen on eating much wheat ourselves. Now, one thing that really did not work this year, or hardly, was the cabbage family, the brassicas, and that's mostly due to a very heavy attack of flea beetle early in the season. So all the seedlings of cabbage and cauliflower, kale, you name it, radish, most of them have disappeared, sadly. So our winter storage of food will not be what we hoped it would be. We'll have lots of beans and peas, and we'll be able to pickle quite a few of the zucchinis, for example, hopefully some tomatoes. But the cabbages and so on that we hoped for, not yet. Hopefully that will work better next year. We'll have to look into how to do that better. Maybe it's a case of growing the seedlings to not plant them until they are a bit bigger. So direct seeding, direct sowing in the bed might not be that good, or it might be better next year, you never know. But growing them on in the greenhouse until they're fairly large and then planting them in the Hugelbed might work better. We'll have to see about that. I didn't even show you the pride of the whole bed yet. The self-crowned queen. A sunflower. My first ever. Tried to grow them a good few times but never succeeded. Here we have one, and more coming. we'll keep you updated. There will be more diaries. I'll be very curious to see what happens next year, and in autumn and winter for that matter. Ideally, many of these plants will self-seed, because we'll never be able to harvest everything. And those seeds, many of them, hopefully will come up, germinate next year and form new plants and sort of self-determine where they grow best. So in this case I sprinkled the seeds, and I sprinkled different seed mixes on different parts of the beds. But next year it will be more a case of natural selection, I suppose you could say. The plants, the seeds which will do best where they are, so different exposures to sun, wind and rain, different height. I mean, the top of the bed will be drier and probably warmer than the bottom. It will sort itself out, and it's supposed to be the case that over the course of a few years you really start noticing what grows where, what wants to grow where. And of course there will be, at least I assume, a fair bit of weeding necessary come spring next year, and maybe some, for example, the borage on the other side there, that's basically become a borage patch, and we don't need that much of it, although the bees really do love it. They come flying here from neighbours maybe more than a kilometre away. They keep bees, and I'm fairly sure it's their bees coming all the way here to enjoy the borage and a few other flowers. But that is a bit too much on that particular patch, and so we can do a bit of selective taking part in a natural selection process ourselves. But it will be very interesting to see after this initial success what happens next. That has always been the big question for me. What happens after the first growing season? How much work will I have to put in? And as for work put in, one last interesting bit is the watering thing. Hugelbeds are supposed to be really good for not requiring so much watering. Now initially, because after finishing the bed it didn't rain for a long time, for I think about 2 months we had hardly any rain. So for a certain amount of time, I think 2 or 3 weeks, I did water this thing almost every night with quite a lot of water. And part of the reason for that being necessary was that the wood that we put in, almost 90% of the mass or the volume of this bed, if you don't count the plants, is dead rotting wood. That was dry. Ideally you would have that completely saturated with water and then build up the bed around it, so that then you wouldn't have to water it anymore, much at least. But most of it in this case was very, very dry, unfortunately, and I didn't see any way to remedy that. There's water on the edge of our property towards the east, but that's a long way down. You don't want to carry a few tons of wood that way, put it in and have it soak up the water and bring it back up much heavier than it was. So it took a lot of watering initially, and after those maybe 2 months of very dry weather it got a little bit wetter, but not an awful lot. But now I haven't watered this for a long time, and you know, you remember the yellow pumpkin leaves? Maybe it's a sign of water shortage as well. I'm not sure at this moment. I have to look into that stuff. Then again, it seems to be growing so rapidly that that seems unlikely. But here we have some chard. That looks a bit wilted, a bit dry. That may be a case of water shortage. But you know that if one plant here and there isn't too happy, then that's not a great concern. If the rest looks healthy and happy, then I guess we're doing quite okay. And maybe that is part of that natural selection process, that these plants are just not happy in that particular spot. And this chard here looks a bit better. A few signs of snails having eaten bits of the leaf, but again, that doesn't worry me too much. This can be harvested and eaten by people not too squeamish. Some even say that leaves with some damage from eating animals is actually more healthy, because there are more, I don't know, chemicals in there which are good for us as well. But then people say lots of things, eh? I guess that will have to do for the Hugelbed. I'll show you, like I said, in a few months what it looks like then, or a few weeks. And as I promised, a short look into the greenhouse, which looks terrible in comparison, but that's mostly because I more or less totally renewed everything maybe half a month, 3 weeks ago, because it wasn't doing too well then, due to there not being very much compost available when I first introduced everything here. Anyway, this is not doing so well at all. And you see a tomato there, a few more flowers, but the plant is tiny compared to the giants in the Hugelbed. And consider that it has been warmer in here, and I did water it quite well as well, so yeah, Hugelbed seems to be the way to go. Right, that's it for now. Thanks.